When we first came to New Zealand, the Muslim scene was non-existent. And so, there were a few of us who got together, my dad being a huge driver in that. And then I just sort of inherited his drive and vision and did it alongside him. The women and the men were all together when we had meetings. We never thought about hiding behind a screen. It's kind of sad that we've got to a point in our Muslim community now where women are not as involved as they used to be. The minute something comes to talking about the mosque or anything like that, or something Muslim, the women are hidden. And that never used to be like that before.
It wasn't like that in the Prophet's time, as far as I know.
It really wasn't.
Well, we came here on the working holiday, and then when we came back in November '66, we really looked around and we found that the Muslims were actually coming in from all parts.
I think in the 60s, New Zealand would have called itself a Christian country. Christianity was the established religion, and anything else really just wasn't there. We were totally invisible. There was no negativity against Muslims, but they also just had no idea who Muslims were. And Muslims, even globally at that time, were sort of not very focused on practicing Islam. They were, they'd really gone to a kind of a low point in terms of, for example, daily prayers and, things like that. There were three Muslim families, and say about 50 students and embassy staff. Maybe that's really all it was.
And my husband, he sort of thought that we have to keep these people together. Well, first of all, we established an association, International Muslim Association, that it had to be registered, so it was official.
Mum was the one who did a lot of the slog. So if there was a community event, Mum was cooking big pots of food. It was really at that very grassroots level for Mum. Dad was organising and Mum was in the kitchen.
1970s sometime, the association bought a house and it was renovated. We had all sorts of people in the community, carpenters and all the rest of it, and they got together. So that was the Islamic Centre established there.
Before that, we used to meet in, a university room or somebody's house or something like that. All sorts of places we would meet as a community. And when we got that first Islamic Centre, that's when the community really felt like it had a hub to come around. And so, that's when we started to do classes. We could pray 5 times a day. It was totally different to what it was before. Before we would just meet kind of socially and on festivals. And then suddenly we could be a community that would actually had the ability to go to the mosque 5 times a day, And so it completely changed. And because of that also, we hired imams as a community. So that brought in experts, in Islamic knowledge. It brought in mentoring. Then later we had the Wellington Islamic Centre, or the Kilbirnie Mosque. It has 2 names. And that just made it more visible, I think, because it looked like a mosque. It didn't just look like a house. And so that gave us a presence in the city. It started to make members of the public notice and come and interact. And that's when things like interfaith dialogue started and things like that. So once you have a place, that's when things can just start to gather around it and the circles grow bigger. People just get that idea that things have been here forever, and if they've come from other countries, it has always been there. But in New Zealand, it's so new, less than 50 years. And so for them to actually understand that there was a beginning and there was a lot of hard work and there was nothing, and then slowly there was a community. And I think, as I said before, it's precious and it needs to be appreciated, I think.
Now, FIANZ stands for Federation of Islamic Associations in New Zealand. Right.
And Mum thought of the name.
Oh, did I? I've forgotten.
There had been different associations, Muslim associations, some in Auckland, Wellington, Hamilton, Palmerston North, Christchurch. And people realised that we need to have one body that looks after everybody. And that was the time, I think, when the government was looking at markets overseas, like Saudi, Iran. The two things kind of came together, and so the FIANZ has one part of its work where it does look after all the Muslim associations that affiliate to it, and then there is what it does for the government, working the certification of the halal meat.
Salamat, first of all, wrote My Spiritual Journey.
He was trying to be theoretical because he was an engineer, so he didn't ever get very personal. But it was a personal journey for him that he took into that world of spirituality, if you like. So that's what his book was about. He was trying to share that. And he always used to say, I'm a systems man. So he was trying to show it as a system of life, if you like.
And then very soon afterwards, I wrote My Voyage into Islam. And he liked that. He says, this is going to be a very valuable book, and it has been. I've actually gone into that spiritual thing, which he did too. It's like when you do things and you live a certain way, your whole being changes into that, in a positive way. And then, so I've now made the trilogy, which is in 3 parts. Part 1 is the family, part 2 is how we did the Islamic bit, and part 3 are all these articles.
The Christchurch attack of 15th of March 2019, that was a day that nobody forgets.
Sirens shatter the peace of Christchurch. Emergency vehicles and armed police responding to a terrorist attack on 2 of the city's mosques.
It was like 9/11 for New Zealand. Nobody forgets it. Everyone remembers exactly what they were doing when they were watching the news and how it unfolded. And it was an incredible shock. And I was first frozen. I remember spending Friday just frozen, and feeling really frustrated that all this has happened and I'm stuck here at home and I don't know what I can do to help or, anything. And then by the evening, I'd had phone calls and things saying, are you able to go down to Christchurch tomorrow, and would you like to head that teamwork that will be down there when it comes time to bury the women who died. It wasn't until 5 days later that we were able to actually do the job that we'd gone there to do, which was to wash and shroud the women who passed away and prepare them for burial. It was like a mass operation. There were 50 bodies that had to be processed. I always maintain now that it's the people of New Zealand that saved our community, because I feel as if that didn't happen, we would have just closed in on ourselves as a community, been very frightened, been very hurt, and we would have been miles worse off than now, because now we feel like we're on a road to healing. The women and the men were all together when we had meetings. I remember that meeting, sitting around in the mosque here in Wellington, talking about FIANZ and forming FIANZ and deciding what the name was, and people had come from different cities, and we were all sitting there, and the women were part of that, and it was very natural. We never thought about hiding behind a screen or some of the things that came in later to our community ways. They weren't there. And that's really sad, because people have come, larger numbers of Muslims have come from different countries where women don't, have that place in the decision making and in the meetings, and that's what's crept into our mosques and our associations. And it doesn't have to be like this. So we've been pushing against it for quite a long time, probably 20 years. Young women now, they don't know what we had before, which is really quite sad. And they shouldn't accept this as a status quo. This is not un-Islamic to have the genders together, deciding on things, sharing in, community matters. That's how it was in our Prophet's time, peace be upon him. And so why shouldn't it be in a Western context handled in that way?